Laurel sat in her penthouse, staring at the folder Martins had given her. Inside were names, bank transactions, blackmail material, proof that Lagos elite were dirtier than anyone imagined. With this, she could control politicians, business tycoons, even law enforcement. But Jide's warning echoed in her head. If you take his deal, you're no longer your own boss. Accept Martin's offer, gain immediate power, but become his pawn. Refuse, risk becoming a target, but keep her independence. Laurel poured herself a drink, staring at the Lagos skyline. She picked up her phone and dialed. Martins answered on the first ring. "I'll work with you," she said. "But?" he asked, already sensing a condition. Laurel smirked. "I'm nobody's puppet. We work together, or we don't work at all." Silence. Then a slow chuckle. "You've got guts, Laurel. Fine. Let's see what you can do." She hung up. Her rise to power had officially begun. Laurel's first move was securing her empire. She restructured Otunba's old network, cutting off loose ends, rewarding loyalty, and eliminating threats. But power was never clean. One night, Miriam barged into her office, face pale. "We have a problem." Laurel looked up. "What now?" Miriam threw a photo onto the table. It was a picture of Jide dead. Shot execution style. Laurel's stomach clenched. She hadn't ordered this. "Who did this?" she asked coldly. Miriam swallowed. "Martins." Laurel's grip tightened on the table. Jide had been a threat, but he wasn't the enemy. Martins had sent a message. Power wasn't shared, it was owned. Laurel exhaled slowly. She had made a deal with the devil. And now, she had to find a way to kill him before he killed her. Laurel sat in her office, Jide's death photo still on the table. Her hands were steady, but inside her blood boiled. Martins had moved first, eliminating Jide to remind her who was in charge. "I should have expected this," she thought. Miriam watched her carefully. "What do we do?" Laurel's lips curled into a smirk. "We let him think he's won." Miriam frowned. "Laurel." "We play the long game," Laurel said. "I'll act like his obedient partner, but behind the scenes, we weaken him. Cut off his allies. Make him bleed without realizing it." Miriam nodded slowly. "And when he's weak?" Laurel's eyes darkened. "We bury him." For weeks, Laurel played the perfect partner. She attended Martin's meetings, smiled at his jokes, nodded at his orders. But behind his back, she moved carefully. She reached out to his rivals, secretly offering them better deals. She bribed his security team, making sure that when the time came, they would turn on him. She cut off his cash flow, making his empire unstable. Martins was too arrogant to notice. He believed Laurel was under his control. Until one night when everything changed. Laurel sat in a private club, sipping wine, when Miriam rushed in. "It's time," she whispered. Laurel raised an eyebrow. "Martins just made his last mistake," Miriam said. "One of his men just sold him out." Laurel smiled. The trap was set. It was time to end the kingmaker. Laurel has set the stage. But taking down a kingmaker is no easy task. Will she succeed? Or will Martins have one last trick up his sleeve? Laurel and Miriam sat in a black SUV, parked outside a luxury high-rise in Ikoyi. Inside, Martins was completely unaware that his empire was about to crumble. Laurel's phone buzzed. It was her inside man, the security chief she had bribed. "It's done," he said. "Martin's guards have been paid off. He's alone." Laurel smirked. "Perfect." She nodded at Miriam. "Let's go." They stepped out of the car, guns concealed under their coats. But just as they reached the entrance, A black Range Rover screeched to a stop in front of them. The doors flew open. Armed men jumped out. Laurel's stomach dropped. It was a setup. Martins had been expecting her. Before she could react, a gun slammed against her head, and the world went dark. Laurel woke up in a dark, cold room. Her wrists were tied to a chair. Miriam was beside her, also bound. Slow clap echoed. Martins stepped out of the shadows, smiling like a man who had already won. "You're good, Laurel," he said. "But not good enough." Laurel didn't flinch. "You should have killed me already." Martins chuckled. "Oh, I will. But first, I want you to understand something." He leaned in. "You thought you were playing me, but I've been watching you from the start. Every move you made, I allowed it." Laurel's mind raced. Was he bluffing? "I let you feel powerful," Martins continued, "because I wanted to see if you were smart enough to join me. But now, you're just another loose end." Laurel's jaw clenched. Martins smirked. "Any last words?" Laurel met his gaze, calm, confident. "Yeah," she said. "You talk too much." At that moment the door burst open. Gunfire erupted. Martin's men fell one by one. Miriam kicked her chair backward, snapping the legs, freeing herself in seconds. She reached over, cutting Laurel's ropes. Laurel grabbed a gun from a fallen guard and turned to Martins. Now the power had shifted. Martin's smirk disappeared. "Laurel," he started, hands raised. "We can still." She pulled the trigger. A single shot to the head. Martins collapsed. Laurel exhaled, heart pounding. It was finally over. Laurel has won. Martins is dead, and the throne is hers. But in Lagos, ruling is never simple. Old enemies resurface. New threats rise. And the higher she climbs, the harder the fall. The question is, can she survive being queen? Laurel stood on the top floor of her penthouse, staring at the city lights. Below her, Lagos pulsed with life, a kingdom she had fought, bled, and killed for. Martin's death had sent shockwaves through the underworld. Some feared her. Others wanted revenge. A knock at the door. Miriam entered, face tense. "We have a problem." Laurel sighed. "Of course we do." Miriam tossed a folder on the table. "Someone is moving against us." Laurel flipped it open. "Photos. Reports." Her eyes narrowed. Of course. The Syrian cartel. Martins had owed them millions. Now that he was gone, they wanted their payment from her. Laurel stood on the top floor of her penthouse, staring at the city lights. Below her, Lagos pulsed with life, a kingdom she had fought, bled, and killed for. Martin's death had sent shockwaves through the underworld. Some feared her. Others wanted revenge. A knock at the door. Miriam entered, face tense. "We have a problem." Laurel sighed. "Of course we do." Miriam tossed a folder on the table. "Someone is moving against us." Laurel flipped it open. "Photos. Reports." Over her dead body. Laurel sat across from Khaled al-Shari, the cartel's Nigerian enforcer. They met in a private club, away from prying eyes. Khaled was calm, polite, even smiled as he sipped his whiskey. But his eyes were cold, calculating. "You killed Martins," he said. "And now you inherit his debts." Laurel smirked. "I inherit his power. That makes me more valuable to you than he ever was." Khaled leaned back, amused. "Go on. You don't need my money," Laurel said. "You need a partner, someone who knows these streets, who controls the flow of business." Khaled raised an eyebrow. "And what do you want in return?" Laurel's smile didn't waver. "Protection. From my real enemies." Khaled chuckled. "You're bold." He took another sip of whiskey, then set his glass down. Fine. You have a deal. Laurel exhaled. Step 1, survive. Step 2, rule. Now, she just had to make sure she wasn't making a deal with the devil. Enemies in the shadows. Laurel has bought herself time. But making deals with cartels is dangerous. Can she control them, or will they control her? Laurel sat in her office, running through new business operations, expanding territory, controlling imports, cleaning money through high-end real estate. She was moving like a queen. Then her phone rang. An unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Who is this? A deep, gravelly voice came through. I warned you, little girl. Laurel froze. She knew that voice. Tunba. The man she had set up. The man who should have been rotting in prison. Her grip tightened on the phone. You should be dead. Otunba laughed, low and dangerous. You thought Martin's was the real power. You think you won. You were just a distraction. Laurel's blood ran cold. Let me tell you something, Laurel, Otunba continued. I built these streets. You're just renting space. The line went dead. Miriam stepped in, frowning. What's wrong? Laurel exhaled. Otunba is back. Miriam's face paled. That's impossible. Laurel stood, her jaw set. Nothing is impossible in Lagos. Laurel's new empire was already under threat. Otunba's men, the ones who had gone into hiding after his downfall, were back. They were attacking her businesses, flipping her people, spreading fear. And the worst part, the police weren't touching them. Miriam slammed a file on the desk. They have protection. Political protection. Laurel's teeth clenched. Otunba wasn't just coming for revenge. He was coming for the entire throne. She had two options. Go to war immediately, but that could leave her empire in ruins. Find out who Otunba was working with, and cut the head off the snake. Laurel took a slow breath. We need to be smart, she said. Find out who's funding him. Who's protecting him. Miriam nodded. And when we do, Laurel's eyes darkened. We burn them all. A war in the shadows. Otunba is alive, and he wants everything Laurel built. But in Lagos, the real power isn't in guns. It's in alliances, betrayals, and moves made in the dark. To win, she must think like a king and strike like a ghost. Businesses. People Otunba had flipped. Among them, one name stood out. Femi Duroji. Femi had been with them since the beginning. Loyal. Trusted. Or so she thought. Miriam sighed. Laurel, I don't think he betrayed us by choice. Laurel's expression was stone. There's no such thing as by choice in this game. She picked up her phone. Tell Femi to meet me. Alone. Miriam hesitated. What if it's a trap? Laurel smirked. Then we make sure it's one for him. Femi arrived at a quiet rooftop lounge in Lekki, sweat beading his forehead. Laurel, I swear. She raised a hand, silencing him. You're working for Otunba. Femi swallowed hard. I had no choice. They. Shut up. Laurel leaned forward. You're still breathing because I want information. Femi exhaled shakily. Otunba isn't just back. He's working with someone bigger. Laurel's eyes narrowed. Who? Femi hesitated. Then he whispered a name. Laurel froze. The name he just said was someone from her past. Someone she trusted. Her blood went cold. You're sure? She asked, voice dangerously calm. Femi nodded. They're meeting tonight. If you move fast, you'll catch them together. Laurel stood, adjusting her dress. Then I guess I have a party to crash. Now she must move fast, Because if she hesitates, everything she built will burn. Laurel arrived at the Orchid Lounge, a private club known for hosting Lagos' most dangerous men. She and Miriam blended into the crowd, watching from the shadows. Then she saw them. Tanba and his partner. Her breath caught. It was Chief Ode Bako, the same politician who had once mentored her, the man who had introduced her to Lagos power players. He had been a father figure, a guide. Now, he was plotting against her. Miriam tensed beside her. What do we do? Laurel's lips curled into a slow, dangerous smile. We remind them who they're dealing with. Laurel didn't wait for an invitation. She strode straight to their table and sat down, unbothered. Otunba's smile faltered. Chief Bako's expression remained unreadable. Laurel, Bako greeted smoothly, as if they were old friends. You're early. She poured herself a drink. And you're a snake. Otunba chuckled, but Bako simply sighed. My dear, you've grown reckless. Laurel's jaw tightened. You're backing Otunba. After everything. Bako leaned forward. This city belongs to men like us. Not young girls who think power is about killing their way to the top. Laurel smirked. Funny. Because I did exactly that, and look who's sitting here, alive. Otunba's eyes darkened. Not for long. Laurel raised her glass. We'll see. Then she stood and walked out, her heart pounding. They had declared war. Now, she was ready to finish it. The battle for Lagos has begun. Otunba and Chief Bako think they can outplay Laurel. But they don't realize. She's always 3 steps ahead. They're wrong. Now Laurel is done playing defense. It's time to strike first, and strike hard. Laurel stood on the balcony of her penthouse, the city lights stretching before her. She had made her decision. No more waiting, she said to Miriam. Otunba and Bako want war. Let's give them one. Miriam hesitated. They have politicians, police, and money. Laurel smirked. And I have something they don't. Miriam raised an eyebrow. What's that? Laurel turned, her eyes gleaming. Loyalty. The real soldiers in Lagos weren't politicians. They were the men and women in the streets, the ones Laurel had fed, protected, and empowered. It was time to remind everyone who really ran this city. That night, Otunba's top warehouse in Aja went up in flames. His supply chain wiped out. His cash reserves. By morning, the underworld was buzzing with one question. Who did this? But deep down they already knew. Laurel sat in a private lounge, sipping her whiskey as Miriam checked her phone. Otunba is panicking, Miriam reported. Bako is telling him to hold off, but... Laurel smiled. Otunba is a street dog. He'll want revenge. Miriam nodded. And Bako? Laurel's eyes darkened. He's the real enemy. But first, we let Otunba destroy himself. She leaned back, watching the fire from her window. This was just the beginning. Laurel has made her move. Otunba has been weakened. Bako is watching. But the real battle is just beginning. Otunba won't go down quietly. He's desperate. And desperate men are the most dangerous. Now it's Laurel's move again. Will she finish him? Or will he strike back first? In a dimly lit room, his face twisted with rage. His warehouse was gone. His money lost. He slammed his fist on the table. That little girl thinks she can ruin me. One of his lieutenants spoke cautiously. Sir, we need to hit back. Hard. Otunba's breathing was heavy, erratic. Then his lips curled into a cruel smile. No, he said. We won't hit her businesses. The men exchanged glances. Then what? Otunba leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with malice. We'll hit her. Laurel was leaving a private restaurant in Ikoyi when she felt it. Something was off. She glanced around, the street was too quiet. Then gunshots erupted. Miriam yanked her back, pushing her behind a car as bullets tore through the air. Laurel drew her gun, firing back. Miriam did the same. Two of their bodyguards were already down. Tires screeched as the attackers sped off. But not before Laurel got a good look at the driver. One of Otunba's men. Laurel exhaled slowly, her hands steady despite the adrenaline. They're getting bold, Miriam muttered. Laurel's eyes darkened. No, they're getting desperate. She stood, brushing dust off her dress. This ends now. Otunba's last mistake. He tried to kill Laurel, but all he did was sign his own death warrant. Now Laurel is done playing. No more warnings. No more games. It's time to end this. Laurel sat in her penthouse, staring at a map of Lagos. Every red mark. An Otunba stronghold. Miriam poured a drink. So, what's the plan? Laurel smiled coldly. Simple. She pointed at 3 locations. Tonight we take them all. Miriam nodded. And Otunba. Laurel's eyes gleamed. He won't live to see morning. At midnight the city erupted. Otunba's safe houses. Raided. His lieutenants. His power. Destroyed in hours. By 3 a.m., he had nowhere left to run. Laurel walked into his final hideout, a crumbling warehouse on the outskirts of Lagos. Otunba was alone, bloodied, breathing heavily. He looked up, eyes filled with hatred. You think you've won. Laurel stepped forward, gun in hand. You made one mistake, Otunba. She raised the gun. You thought I was afraid of you. Bang. The shot echoed. It was over. Otunba is dead. Laurel has won. But Chief Bako is still out there. And he's more dangerous than ever. But there's one last threat. Chief Bako. The man who taught her the game. The man who betrayed her. Now teacher and student must face off. And only one can survive. Laurel stood in her penthouse, staring out over Lagos. The city was hers. But she wasn't celebrating. Miriam poured a drink. We did it. Laurel took the glass but didn't drink. Not yet. Miriam sighed. Bako. Laurel nodded. He's still in play. Miriam leaned against the bar. He won't get his hands dirty. He'll send someone. Laurel smirked. Let him. She turned, eyes cold. I'm ready. The next morning the headlines shook Lagos. Police commissioner removed amid corruption scandal. Governor's office under investigation. Chief Ode Bako under fire. Laurel's plan had worked. Instead of fighting Bako in the streets, she hit him where it hurt. His power. His reputation. His safety. Miriam grinned. He's scrambling. Laurel sipped her drink. Good. Then her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Deep voice. Bako. You think you've won. Laurel smiled. I know I have. Silence. Then Bako spoke. Meet me. One last time. Laurel's fingers tightened around the glass. It was time to end this. Now it comes down to one last meeting. A battle not of guns, but of power, control, and survival. In Lagos, only one ruler can stand. The private villa in Banana Island was quiet. Too quiet. Laurel stepped inside, alone, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Chief Bako sat at the head of a grand dining table, a bottle of vintage whiskey before him. He gestured to a seat. Join me. Laurel smirked. I prefer to stand. Bako chuckled. Always the rebel. She folded her arms. You called this meeting. Speak. Bako leaned forward. I underestimated you. You won the streets. You crippled my connections. Laurel's eyes didn't waver. But, Bako continued, pouring a drink. You're young. And youth makes mistakes. He took a sip. You think you can rule alone? Laurel smiled coldly. I don't think, Chief. I know. Bako exhaled, his grip tightening around the glass. Then I suppose we're done here. Laurel nodded. Yes. She turned to leave. Then Bako spoke. Be careful, Laurel. Power is a hungry beast. And one day, it'll turn on you. Laurel glanced back. I'll take my chances. Then she walked out. And the era of Chief Bako ended. A week later, Lagos had a new ruler. Laurel sat in a high-rise overlooking the city. Her empire now untouchable. Miriam entered holding a file. It's official. Bako is leaving the country. Disgraced. Laurel nodded. Good. Miriam studied her. You won. Laurel sipped her drink, gazing at the streets below. Not yet. Miriam frowned. What do you mean? Laurel's smile was slow. There's always another enemy. She set down her glass. And I'll be ready. As the city lights glowed beneath her, one thing was clear. Laurel wasn't just a survivor. She was the queen of Lagos. And no one was taking her crown. The night was quiet, but Laurel's mind was not. She stood on her penthouse balcony, staring out over Lagos. Miriam joined her. You should rest. Laurel smirked. Can't. Miriam sighed. You got everything you wanted. Laurel's fingers tightened on the railing. Yeah. And now I have to keep it. Miriam studied her. You don't seem happy. Laurel exhaled. Power isn't about winning, Miriam. It's about never losing. Days passed. Laurel ruled Lagos, but something felt different. She noticed whispers in the streets. Old allies keeping their distance. Miriam warned her. People fear you now. Laurel nodded. Good. Miriam hesitated. Fear fades. Loyalty doesn't. Laurel said nothing. But deep down she knew. She had built an empire of fear. And someday someone would come to take it from her. Laurel had everything but no one to trust. Power made her strong, but it also made her a target. She won the game but lost herself. As she sat alone in her penthouse, watching the city she controlled, one thought echoed in her mind. Was it worth it? Because in the world of power, the fight never ends. And queens don't get happy endings. Laurel won the streets. But power always demands a price. Did power claim Laurel's life? No, Laurel survived. But in many ways she lost herself. She had everything: money, power, control. But she also had fear, isolation, and paranoia. She didn't die, but the girl she used to be. She was long gone. And that's the true price of power. The moral lesson on this story is: power comes at a cost. The higher you rise, the more you stand alone. Power demands sacrifices. Sometimes those sacrifices are the things you once loved. Laurel ruled through fear, but fear fades. True power comes from loyalty, respect, and trust. Otunba and Bako lost because they underestimated others and let their greed and ego blind them. Laurel won. But in the end, was she truly happy? Be careful what you wish for. Laurel wanted power and she got it. But was it worth the fight? Laurel's story teaches us that winning isn't always victory. Sometimes the battle is against enemies.